I promise you, every single one of you here, somebody you know has health care because of the Affordable Care Act. And it did not solve every problem, but it's made a difference. It's provided people with some security, and I could not have done that without your vote. Now, I will give you the opposite example. When I was president, we had to deal with Ebola and H1N virus, and so I started really studying issues of pandemic, and I called my team together in my second term, and I said, we need to put together a playbook for how to deal with pandemic. The same way we have a playbook for how to deal with natural disasters, hurricanes, floods, etc. What are we going to do? And so we put together the playbook, we called together all the agencies, sat them down, we ran what are called tabletop exercises to practice how are we going to deal with the state public health systems, what are we going to do with the schools, what kinds of travel restrictions might be put in place, how do we accelerate vaccines, had it all in this big book. And so when Donald Trump comes in, I hand it to him. Where's the book? I handed it to him, and apparently it was lost. And 3 years later, a pandemic hits. Now, I want to be fair on this. No matter who was president, the pandemic was going to be a terrible crisis. People were going to get sick, people were going to die. But if you look at a country like Canada, their per capita death rate, think about this, their per capita death rate was 60% lower than in the United States.
Wow.
Over 1 million people died during the pandemic here in the U.S., so do the math. 60% of 1 million people is 600,000 people. That's somebody's grandparent. That's somebody's parent. That's somebody's husband or wife. That's somebody's co-worker, somebody's friend. That might be alive if we had had a competent president who was focused on dealing with the crisis instead of wondering whether we could treat COVID by injecting bleach into our lungs. If somebody tells you this election does not matter, tell them respectfully that having a president who understands policy and is willing to put in the work does matter. And for those of you who even after they hear that are still on the side, let me tell you what else matters. Values matter. Character matters. A president makes 1 million decisions. And most of the time they're judgment calls. The easy decisions, the obvious decisions get made by somebody else. The hard ones are what gets into the president's desk. And you can't anticipate every issue that's going to come down the pipe. And so it's really important, does that person have a moral compass? Do they have some integrity? Are they focused on doing what's right by the American people? Values matter. Some of you know that when I was growing up, I didn't have a father in the house, but I did have people around me. Stepfather, grandparents, teachers, coaches, most of all my mom, who taught me the difference between right and wrong. Who showed me what it meant to have integrity, to be honest, to be responsible, to work hard, to treat other people the way I wanted to be treated.
Yes.
Now, there were times where I did not perfectly live up to those values, especially when I was a teenager. But as I got older, I internalized those values. I tried to live up to them. Not perfectly, but I knew they were important, and I wanted to be that person. I suspect most of you grew up the same way. And one of the most disturbing things about this election, not just this election, but Trump's entire rise in politics, you can see it just pervading our political culture, is how we seem to have just set aside those values that we were taught.
Right.
A month ago, we had one of the deadliest hurricanes in American history. President Biden and Vice President Harris were in some of the communities that were affected, meeting with local officials, comforting families. And at the same time, Donald Trump and Vance were making up stories about the Biden administration withholding aid, not giving it to Republican areas, giving it to undocumented immigrants, just making stuff up.
Yep.
Even Republicans on the ground said that's not true. That's a bald-faced lie. My question is, when did that become okay? At a time when people were desperate and they need help, why would you try to exploit that for political gain? No matter where you stand on the issue, no matter what party you belong to, why would you go along with that? If your co-workers acted like that, they wouldn't be your co-workers for very long. If you had family members, if you had a family member who acted like that, you might still love them, but you wouldn't put them in charge of anything. Because you realize they're not trustworthy. And yet, when Donald Trump lies or cheats or shows utter disregard for our Constitution, when he calls service members who died in battle losers, or fellow citizens vermin, so many of the supporters are willing to excuse him, or justify it, or overlook it. You know, it's been 20 years since I first appeared before a national audience at the Democratic Convention in Boston. And in that speech, I insisted there are no red states or blue states, no black America or white America, or gay or straight America. It was just the United States of America. And some people at the time, and certainly in subsequent years, thought, that's naive, given how divided the country seemed at the time. But you know what? It was based on my experience. I was traveling across Illinois and later traveling across places like Wisconsin, Michigan, and the rest of the country. I had witnessed time and again the goodness and the neighborliness, shared values and integrity bound people together. I had seen people who had opposed the Iraq War stand up and salute a veteran, or volunteer to help wounded warriors. I had seen conservative Republicans provide shelter and support for young immigrants and help homeless folks in their communities. It didn't matter what part of the country it was, what race or faith people were from. I saw people live up to that golden rule. A lot has changed since then. I've gotten grayer, obviously. Our politics has gotten a lot more toxic. Social media is full of conspiracy theories and outright lies. Some of it, by the way, produced by the Russians and the Chinese and the Iranians. And all those messages fed into our phones, into our brains, isolate us and divide us. Encourage us to mistrust each other and hate each other. But I remain convinced that that is not the kind of country most of us want.
No.
I believe that the vast majority of people in this country are good, and that they are honest, and that they are generous, and that they are fair. And whether they are Democrats or Republicans or independents, they want those values reflected in their politics. And whatever questions you may still have about Kamala's position on this or that issue, I can tell you that Not just in this campaign, but throughout her entire career, she has conducted herself with grace and with dignity, that she respects people of all races and all faiths, that she does not demonize those who do not support her, or threaten those who disagree with her, and that as president, she will care and listen to all the people of these United States. So in these last 3 days, as I hope you are talking to people who are still undecided, I hope the conversation isn't just about policy. I hope it's also about values, about decency. If you're a small business owner who thinks Democrats are too quick to regulate, all right, that's a legitimate debate to have. But what does it say when Donald Trump's history as a businessman is littered with so many scams and lawsuits that people in his own hometown don't want to work with him? Would you do business with someone like that?
No.
And if you wouldn't, why would you want him as your president?
No.
Regardless of what your party affiliation is. If you're a union member, think about who's more likely to look out for your interests. Someone like Kamala, who has stood up for working people all her life, or somebody like Donald Trump, who has encouraged union busting and stiffed his own workers. If he cheats them, what's he going to do for you?